Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Bank Holiday Monday. Don't suppose you'd ever thought you'd ever see me in a shirt like this. Anyway, looks like a nice warm one today. Good day to be outside, good day to be alive, and I hope you have a lovely day today. We are working our way through the letter of Paul to the Romans, and I'm sure you agree by now it's a tough book, but actually it's an absolutely superb book and a book that's well worth getting to know. We're in chapter 4. I'm going to read you now Romans chapter 4, verses 1 to 12. So here goes. Paul writes, "What then are we to say was gained by Abraham, our ancestor according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Now to one who works, God wages are not reckoned as a gift, but as something due. But to one who without works trusts him who justifies the ungodly, such faith is reckoned as righteousness. So also David speaks of the blessedness of those to whom God reckons righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose iniquities are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one against whom the law will not reckon sin. Is this blessedness then pronounced only on the circumcised or also on the uncircumcised? We say faith was reckoned to Abraham as righteousness. How then was it reckoned to him? Was it before or after he'd been circumcised? It was not after, but before he was circumcised. He received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised. The purpose was to make him the ancestor of all who believe without being circumcised, and thus have righteousness reckoned to them, and likewise the ancestor of the circumcised, who are not only circumcised but also follow the example of the faith that our father Abraham had before he was circumcised." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, I remember I first met God, you might say, when I was about 14 years old. I went to a meeting and I decided then that there really was a God. And the next step was, if there really is a God, I better get the right side of him because I'm going to meet him one day. I better get myself right with God because I'm going to need to be so one day. And I think what this reading is about this morning, it's all about being right with God, and more importantly, how we can be right with God. That's what righteousness means. It means being righteous. It means being right before God. So the question this morning is, how do we become right with God? How can we become righteous? And Paul is really, really clear that about how we are to become righteous. We do it, but we get it by faith. And it's absolutely clear. We cannot get it by doing works. We cannot get there by our many grand achievements over the years. We achieve it we don't achieve it, we receive it by faith. And that is the way, that is how we get right with God. If you want to get right with God, we receive it by faith, by trusting in God, by receiving it by faith. And that is how we receive it. And to illustrate this, he uses the Old Testament. He starts with Abraham. You don't get much greater than that. The father of many nations. And he's known and best remembered for being the father of many nations. But how did he get right with God? When in Genesis chapter 15, when God told him that he was going to become the father of many nations, even though he and his wife were old and barren, what does the Bible say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. In other words, it wasn't by being the father of many nations. It wasn't by all the great works that Abraham did. Even Abraham didn't do enough. Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. In other words, Abraham became righteous by faith. Abraham became righteous by believing in God. That's the first one. And if Abraham's not enough, we'll go on to David. Again, great man of Jewish history, united the nation, the whole Jewish nation was won many battles, defeated Goliath. He did many, many things. But he also fouled up on one occasion, and he met this lady called Bathsheba. Always remember her name because she was in the bath when he saw her, Bathsheba, and he had his wicked way with her, and she became pregnant. And he found out that she was the wife of one of his top generals. And when he tried to cover it up, when they weren't going to play ball with that, He actually had him bumped off on the Russian front. And God was not pleased. David fouled up. But what did David do eventually when David found out? He threw himself entirely on the mercy of God. He trusted in God. He had faith in God, which is what he means when he says, blessed is the one whose sins are forgiven. So how did David get his sins forgiven? Not by doing many, many works of restitution, not by doing great numbers of penances or all sorts of clever and amazing good works and giving lots of money away and hours in prayer. No, he received his forgiveness by faith. So Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteous, and David became righteous by trusting and throwing himself on the mercy of God too. So how do we receive righteousness? We receive it by faith. But then there's all this talk about circumcision. A little bit early on a Monday morning for this type of thing to talk, to be honest, but there we go. What does it mean? Well, circumcision in those days, and still is in the Jewish faith today, is a sign of righteousness. It's a sign that you're in. It's a sign that you're part of the Jewish people. And circumcision was started under Abraham. And at the time of Paul, and still today, circumcision is still considered to be a very, very important thing. But what Paul comes out of here, what got out of this, is Abraham became righteous before he was circumcised. He became righteous by faith, not by circumcision. The circumcision was a sign that he had faith. The faith is the thing you had to have. And that is what made him righteous. And so the same is true for us today. How do we become righteous? We become righteous by faith. Not by baptism, that's a sign that we have faith. Not by endless receiving of Holy Communion, good that is, and a sign that we have faith. We are made righteous by faith in God, by trusting in God. That was true for Abraham, it was true for David, and it's true for us today. So the question today is, how do we become righteous? How can we be right with God? What would I have said to that 14-year-old boy who became a Christian nearly 40 years ago? I want to get right with God. What would I have said? I'd have said, have faith. Put your trust in God. And that is the way we can be righteous before God. Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteous. And if we do that, if we put our faith and our trust in him, if we believe and trust in him, then you and I can be righteous too. Not by our many good works, all that type of thing, good though they may be, we are made righteous by faith and by faith in God. And may you know our faithful God loving you, helping you, and being with you